The snowstorm hit harder than any of us expected. What started as a mild flurry that morning had turned into a blinding, howling whiteout by mid-afternoon. By the time the sheriff's office got the call about the missing hikers, the roads were nearly impassable. "We've got to act fast," Sheriff Dalton said, his voice grim as he briefed the rescue team. 4 hikers were due back yesterday evening. They're up on the Devil's Ridge Trail. We've got a small window before this storm gets even worse. I volunteered without hesitation. Our town was small, and most of us knew each other. Missing hikers in these parts usually meant tourists underestimating the mountains. I figured we'd find them huddled somewhere, cold and embarrassed but alive. The rescue party consisted of 5 of us: Sheriff Dalton, his deputy Mark, 2 experienced outdoorsmen named Hank and Lewis, and me. We packed emergency supplies, a radio, and headlamps. By the time we set out, night was falling, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. The trailhead was buried under at least 2 feet of snow, and the wind cut through our gear like it wasn't even there. Visibility was terrible, but we followed the hikers' reported route, our headlamps illuminating only a few feet ahead. The silence between gusts of wind was unnerving, broken only by the crunch of our boots in the snow. After about an hour, we came across the hikers' tracks. They were faint and already being erased by the storm, but they headed up toward the ridge. Relief flickered through me. At least we had a lead. Then we found their campsite. The tents were still standing, flapping weakly in the wind. Snow had partially buried them, but the camp didn't look disturbed. Inside, we found their gear, food, and even their jackets. No footprints led away from the site. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. "This doesn't make sense," Mark muttered, his breath fogging up in the cold. "Maybe they panicked and tried to find shelter somewhere else," Hank suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. Sheriff Dalton frowned. "Split up and search the immediate area. Stay within shouting distance." We spread out, our lights cutting through the swirling snow. I'd gone maybe 50 yards when I noticed something strange. A single set of tracks heading uphill, separate from the others. They were deep and wide, like someone dragging something heavy. I called out to the others and followed the trail. It led me to a cluster of boulders. For a moment, I thought I saw movement in the shadows. My pulse quickened as I edged closer, calling out, "Hello? Anyone there?" No answer. Then, from behind me, a voice whispered my name. I spun around, heart hammering, but no one was there. Just the wind and snow. I radioed the others, trying to keep my voice steady. "I think I found something. Need backup." By the time the rest of the team arrived, the tracks I'd followed had vanished, buried by fresh snow. Sheriff Dalton looked at me skeptically, but he didn't say anything. We regrouped and decided to head back to the campsite to reassess. That's when things got worse. The wind carried faint sounds, voices muffled and distant. At first, we thought it was the hikers, but the voices were strange, too soft to make out the words, but there was a rhythmic cadence to them like chanting. Hank swore he saw movement in the trees, shadows flitting between the trunks. We stuck closer together, our nerves fraying with each step. Then, as we approached the campsite, we saw something that stopped us in our tracks. The tents were gone. Not just collapsed or blown over. Gone, as if they'd never been there. The snow was pristine, undisturbed. "This isn't possible," Lewis whispered, his face pale. Sheriff Dalton's jaw tightened. "We're heading back." "Now." But the way back was gone. The storm had erased our tracks, and every direction looked the same. Worse, the landscape seemed to shift. Trees appeared where there hadn't been any before, and landmarks we'd passed earlier were nowhere to be seen. It was as if the forest was closing in around us. Then came the laughter. Low and guttural at first, it echoed from all around us, impossible to pinpoint. We formed a tight circle, our backs to each other, flashlights darting through the darkness. The laughter grew louder, more distorted, as if coming from multiple voices. "This isn't real," Mark said, his voice shaking. "It's just the wind playing tricks." But then we saw them. Figures emerging from the snowstorm, their shapes barely human. They moved unnaturally, jerking and twisting as they drew closer. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dark, and their mouths opened in wide, inhuman grins. Panic set in. We ran, scattering into the storm despite Sheriff Dalton's shouts to stay together. I don't know how long I ran, but eventually I stumbled and fell, landing hard in the snow. When I looked up, I was alone. The storm had quieted, and the figures were gone. I tried calling out, but my voice was swallowed by the silence. Then I saw it, a single set of tracks in the snow, leading away from me. They weren't mine, and they weren't human. I followed them, too terrified to do anything else. They led me back to the trailhead, where the sheriff's truck sat, its engine idling. But when I opened the door, the cab was empty. The radio crackled faintly, a single phrase repeating over and over. It watches. It waits. The snowstorm had come out of nowhere, transforming the highway into an endless, featureless white. I'd been driving for hours, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, the rhythmic thump of the windshield wipers my only companion. The GPS had stopped working miles ago, and my phone had no signal. I'd foolishly ignored the weather warnings, determined to make it to the remote mountain lodge where my friend Mike was waiting. By the time I realized how bad it was, turning back wasn't an option. The storm had swallowed the road, and I couldn't tell where the pavement ended and the ditch began. My only hope was to push forward, hoping to find a sign, a turnoff, anything to tell me I wasn't hopelessly lost. Then I saw it, a faint glow in the distance, like the warm light of a cabin. Relief surged through me, and I steered toward it, the tires slipping and sliding on the icy road. As I got closer, the glow resolved into a set of headlights. A car, half buried in a snowdrift, its engine idling. I pulled up alongside it, rolling down my window. "Hey, you okay in there?" There was no response. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed out, the wind slicing through my jacket. The other car's driver's side door was ajar, snow piling up on the seat. Peering inside, I saw a single set of footprints leading away from the vehicle and into the woods. "Hello!" I called, but my voice was swallowed by the storm. Against my better judgment, I followed the tracks. Whoever it was, they couldn't have gone far in this weather. The footprints led me to a small clearing, where I found something that stopped me cold. A figure lay sprawled in the snow, face down and motionless. I rushed over, turning them onto their back. It was a young woman, her face pale, her lips blue. She wasn't breathing. My heart pounded as I checked for a pulse. Nothing. Desperate, I started CPR, my breath fogging in the freezing air. After what felt like an eternity, she gasped, her eyes flying open. They were wide and glassy, filled with an emotion I couldn't place. "You're okay," I said, helping her sit up. "What were you doing out here?" She didn't answer, just stared at me with those unnerving eyes. Her clothes were thin and inappropriate for the weather, yet she didn't seem cold. I draped my jacket over her shoulders. "Come on, let's get you back to my car. We need to get you warm." She followed me without a word, her movements stiff and unnatural. Back at the car, I cranked the heat and handed her a blanket from the back seat. "What's your name?" I asked. "Clara," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Clara, I'm Jake. We'll get you to a hospital, okay?" She didn't respond, just stared out the window as if seeing something I couldn't. I tried the ignition, but the engine sputtered and died. Swearing under my breath, I grabbed my phone. Still no signal. "Stay here," I told her. "I'll check the other car for supplies." As I stepped back into the storm, a strange sensation prickled at the back of my neck. The other car was just as I'd left it, but something about it felt off. The headlights seemed dimmer, the snow piling higher around it. I opened the trunk and found a blanket and a small first aid kit. When I turned back, Clara was standing in the snow, barefoot and staring at me. "You shouldn't have followed," she said, her voice echoing unnaturally. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my pulse quickening. "They never come back," she said, taking a step closer. Her eyes glowed faintly, like the reflection of moonlight on ice. A sudden, crushing cold enveloped me, far worse than the storm. I stumbled back, dropping the blanket. "Clara, we need to get out of here." She tilted her head, a sad smile playing on her lips. "I'm not Clara. She's gone. They took her. And now they'll take you too." The wind howled, and for a moment, I thought I saw shapes moving within it, tall, shadowy figures with glowing eyes. Panic surged through me, and I turned to run, but Clara's hand shot out, ice cold and impossibly strong. "You can't leave," she said. "Not now. Not ever." The storm hit harder than anyone had predicted. What was supposed to be a routine supply run turned into a fight for survival as our convoy of 3 trucks crawled through blinding snow and gale-force winds. We were tasked with delivering critical supplies to a remote research station deep in the Alaskan wilderness, a route we'd taken dozens of times before. But this time, something was different. Something was wrong. Visibility's dropping fast, crackled over the radio. It was Mike, the lead driver. Everyone stay close. If we lose sight of each other, we're done. I was driving the second truck, with Davis riding shotgun. He had a knack for keeping things light, but even he was unusually quiet. The storm swallowed the world outside our windshield, leaving nothing but a swirling vortex of white. The only thing grounding us was the faint glow of Mike's taillights ahead. Think we'll make it? Davis finally asked, his voice tight. We'll be fine, I lied. Just gotta stick together. An hour passed, maybe 2. Time felt meaningless in the storm. The radio chatter was sparse, mostly Mike giving updates or the third driver, Carla, confirming she was still with us. But then something strange happened. Mike's taillights began to flicker. Mike, your lights okay? I called over the radio. What? His voice crackled back, confused. They're fine. Why? They're flickering, Davis said, leaning forward to squint through the windshield. Before I could respond, the lights vanished altogether. Mike? Mike, come in. I shouted into the radio. Silence. Panic set in as I slowed the truck, scanning the blizzard for any sign of him. Carla, you see anything? Negative, she replied, her voice trembling. He was there 1 second, and gone the next. We pulled over, killed the engines, and stepped into the storm, our flashlights barely cutting through the snow. The wind howled like a living thing, and the cold bit through every layer of clothing. We searched for what felt like an eternity, but found nothing. No tracks, no truck, no Mike. This doesn't make sense, Davis muttered, his breath fogging in the icy air. How does a whole truck just vanish? We need to keep moving, Carla said, her face pale. If we stay out here, we'll freeze to death. Reluctantly, we agreed. I took the lead this time, with Carla following close behind. But the unease was palpable. The storm seemed to grow angrier with every passing mile, and strange noises began to creep into the wind. Low, guttural sounds that didn't belong. Did you hear that? Davis whispered. Hear what? I asked, though I'd heard it too. A distant, echoing wail that raised every hair on my body. It's probably the wind, I said, more to convince myself than him. Then Carla's voice crackled over the radio, frantic. Guys, something's wrong. There's someone on the road ahead. My stomach dropped. What? Who? I don't know, she said. They're just standing there. I squinted through the windshield but saw nothing. Carla, there's no one there. I'm telling you, I see someone, she insisted. And then her radio went silent. I slammed on the brakes and jumped out, Davis close behind. Carla's truck was stopped a few yards back, its lights still on, but the driver's seat was empty. The door hung open, swinging in the wind. I rushed to the truck, shouting her name, but there was no sign of her. Just the same endless snow. We have to get out of here, Davis said, his voice shaking. No. I wanted to argue, to keep searching, but deep down, I knew he was right. Whatever was happening, it wasn't something we could fight. We climbed back into the truck and drove on, alone in the storm. The noises grew louder as we went, whispers, laughter, screams. And then through the haze, I saw them. Figures moving alongside the truck, pale and indistinct, their eyes glowing like embers. They didn't look human. They looked like shadows given form, twisting and writhing in the snow. Don't stop, Davis said, his voice barely audible. Whatever you do, don't stop. I pressed the pedal to the floor, the engine roaring as we barreled through the storm. The figures kept pace, their movements unnatural, their faces blank and emotionless. One of them reached for the window, its fingers long and claw-like. I swerved, and it vanished into the snow. Finally, the storm began to break, the wind dying down and the snow thinning. The figures disappeared, and for the first time in hours, I could see the road ahead. Relief washed over me as the lights of the research station came into view. We stumbled inside, frostbitten and shaken but alive. The researchers stared at us in shock. "Where's the rest of your convoy?" one of them asked. "Gone," I said, my voice hollow. "They're gone." We tried to explain what had happened, but the more we talked, the crazier it sounded. No one believed us. They chalked it up to exhaustion and hypothermia, said we'd imagined it. But I knew the truth. Something was out there in the storm, something that had taken Mike and Carla, something that had nearly taken us. Weeks later, the trucks were found, abandoned and buried in snow. There were no signs of struggle, no footprints, no bodies. Just empty vehicles, their engines dead and their radios silent. I still hear the whispers sometimes, late at night when the wind is strong.